CAP fighters. So by the time I get down where I could see the two destroyers, they were turning broadsides towards me. And I saw 8 planes coming at me above me, 4 about my level and 4 above them. And I was busy rocking my wings and making sure they didn't start shooting. And I broke back to the right, came in on the proper hitting, and circled the picket destroyers in the proper direction for the day, and then headed from there to the fleet. So when we got past the fleet, I sent my one wingman in, and I called ahead and told him that I had one plane shot up, and no landing gear, and they wouldn't take them forward, but the other carrier on the far side of the route signaled they would take them forward, so we went over there, we got a landing pattern, I dropped back through wing on him as he made his approach, and he turned around, went downwind, turned into the carrier, and by the time I come back upwind on the starboard side of the carrier, he made a belly landing. I saw him climb out of his aircraft, and by the time I got out and turned back down on the other side, to head back for my ship, they pushed that plane right off the fan tail. It was destroyed, and there was no point in keeping it. So then I went back and my ship reported I was safe, plane was gone. That's one of the things that happens. But I did believe in my instruments. As long as you unlock your gyro instruments, you're fine. You can't believe the gyro instruments are locked. It'll always tell you you're right.
Guaranteed.
So John, you had a bad day with instruments. We'll be vouching. I'm saying John had a bad day with instruments.
Oh, yeah?
Actually, one particular instrument, we're vouching.
Yeah, that's part of the story, I think, is on one mission, probably the one that Laurie's referring to, the crew chief, the ground engineering officer, came up with a big smile on his face during the morning briefing and said, Lieutenant, we have a surprise for you today. You have a brand new airplane. He may have thought that was good news, not to me or our crew. An airplane, a new airplane is one that has characteristics that you don't know about. I sometimes relate this to getting a new wife. If someone came up to me and said, oh, I have a new wife for you, is that good news? You know, after we were married for 63 years before Marie passed on, we could communicate with, yeah, and we know exactly what was going on. Can you imagine a new wife understanding anything like that? So an aircraft is like that. They look alike. The blueprints are pretty much the same, but they fly differently. Not a lot differently, but differently enough. So you need to fly one. My rule is 10 hours before you're really familiar with the flying characteristics. The trim head operation on all surfaces, the general takeoff conditions, the cruise speeds, wing flap orientation, characteristics, and most important of all, the engines. And of that is the fuel consumption. So on this flight, we did a Battle of the Bulge operation, trying to drop bombs on places in Germany that would feed the Battle of the Bulge, troops, material, fuel, that sort of thing. And the city of Frankfurt, probably some of you visited Frankfurt, Germany. It was a major rail hub feeding the German forces in the Bulge, and the date was January 5 of 1945. The Battle of the Bulge started about 2 or 3 weeks before that. But when we left the target, and we leave by dropping 1,000 feet to get below any anti-aircraft fire, I noticed the fuel gauge pressure on number 3 engine, that's the engine on this side, right here, started to flicker. That's kind of bad news in itself, but you just sort of keep your eye on it. Then it goes solid red, and the pressure is no longer there, and the fuel pressure gauge drops to 0. So number 3 engine wasn't getting any fuel. Oh, we'd throw on booster pumps right away in the tank to the special pump to add additional flow if necessary. Didn't help at all. We looked at the fuel gauge for number 3 engine. It said 70 gallons. That would have been enough to get us back to England. It was probably half an hour flying to spare. But that seemed odd. Fuel, 70 gallons. Fuel pressure 0. The engine, you can tell right away, the manifold pressure drops quickly to nothing, and you can just look at the prop and tell it's not doing anything. So we feathered that engine, and that is to turn the propeller blades in line with the air, so the blades, the propeller does not windmill. A windmilling engine is fatal, almost always, because it runs by the air, making it turn without lubrication. Did you ever run your car engine without oil in it? Well, in the air, that engine gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And I've not seen this myself, but others have said they looked in it and it was white hot from the friction. And then right behind the engine is a fuel tank. In some cases, there may be fuel left in the tank, but it always has fuel, air, vapor in it. So in that condition, it's fatal. The engine burns, sets the air ducts on fire, and the only thing to do is to bail out. So we feathered the engine and it stopped, fortunately. But what about the other engines? We checked the fuel on all of those, fuel gauge. All of them had anywhere from 70 to 80 gallons. Looked okay, but we still were very suspicious. A few minutes later, guess what? Number 2 engine, fuel pressure light flickered, and then went solid red, and it went to 0. Feathered that engine, and by that time we didn't have the power to stay up with the formation. We slid off to one side. German jet fighters were in the area, so were the piston fighters. But we requested permission to leave the formation and explain our problem. The lead pilot, command pilot, never heard from us again. When he got back to England, he reported what we had told him, that we had 2 engines out, and requested permission to leave the formation for emergency landing. So that went through to the 8th Air Force history, ultimately, because it took us 5 days to get back. And we're listed as killed in action in northern France. So I'm happy to report to you today that the fatalities of the 8th Air Force can be reduced by 10, because we weren't killed in action, but we came awful close. So the question then was what to do, because the other engines, the fuel measuring gauge, which that's the instrument Rory was telling you about, was no good. We had no idea how much time we had left. So in those situations, we had 2 options. The crew could bail out, and of course, American flight crews just talking amongst themselves like fraternity boys, I suppose. There's no high rank. There's a level of authority, and that's okay. But other than that, we just informally, you say, all right, what do you guys want to do? You can bail out now, but if you do, you'll become prisoners of war, because we're still over German territory. If you don't bail out, then we'll stay with the aircraft and try to find the flattest region that we can to put it down. What do you want to do? They all said, we'll stay with the aircraft. The reason for that is that crash procedures, which we practiced, was for everyone but the cockpit crew to get into the radio room, rub up against each other and go against the bulkhead, bring in pads and parachutes, pack around you, and the aircraft with the wheels up is like a big sled. And so a fortress can land on pretty rough ground and still survive. Where if the wing were a little bit higher, like on the B-24, where you have to come down and the fuselage would touch first or the wheel, and then you try to hold it ultimately, at around 90 miles an hour, one wing would catch. And when the wing catches, you cartwheel. And when you cartwheel, the whole thing disintegrates. And if there's any fuel aboard, usually there's some, boom. So the Fortress is rugged. It's just like Ray's plane there, really rugged. And so that's what we did. We found a spot in Belgium to bring it down, and went through a Belgian swamp. There was no poppies. It was in Flanders too. But, trees and bushes and mud and water went splashing up all over. About a mile in the swamp, went up on our nose, crunched, and then came back. All because we had faulty fuel gauges. I have no idea how they ever got that far with not knowing, but we landed with no fuel. Or on the landing, the last 1,000 yards, the two outboard engines quit. And so we had a 30-ton glider. And as we approached the place we wanted to land, a building about 44 stories high, apartment building of some kind, we couldn't see it in the late afternoon light. It suddenly came out of the gloom, and we lifted the right wing and cleared that building, and then came right on down into the flat area of the swamp. And the aircraft was totaled, but everyone was safe. No one was even scratched. We evacuated the aircraft according to our practice procedures. It all worked out fine. But fuel gauges should have been checked. Hopefully, everyone thought they were all right, I guess. And in that case, we lost this airplane. It didn't even complete its first mission. Wow. Sorry, taxpayers.
We have questions. Is that a question?
I have a question for Ray. When you nowadays, when you land aboard a ship, and you've got some damage to your airplane or something, some event that you went through like you did, the system now does not allow you to get back in an airplane for a couple, 3, 4, 5 days sometimes, or longer depending on what the event is. I'm curious that you come back in an F6F and you've got your wing basically shot up and you land. Was there any policies or procedures or anything you went through as an air crew to, you go down to Intel and you describe what happened to you, but did you have to go through any reports? And then when did you get back in the air after that?
Well, for me, aboard a carrier, for instance, you don't have your own aircraft.
Right.
You'll take the aircraft depending on where you are in the schedule,
right,
and where the aircraft is parked on the deck. And as they come out in a certain order, you match.
Right.
The skipper takes the first plane. Usually I took the second plane because I flew wing and skipper most of the time. And anybody else, as the plane could come out to a takeoff position, wherever he came on the.
Right.
So that plane that I brought back, they just took the wing off, took a picture of both sides, threw it overboard, put a new wing on it, and I always figured the plane was back in the air the next day.
How about you?
Well, I was back in the next day,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's where the question was driving from.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, we didn't even discuss it.
Yeah.
We came back and everybody knew what happened, and there was no reports to make out. It just, the wing was gone, that was it.
Yeah. Nowadays you'd be down for a week.